Everyone was waiting to see if the herbal remedy Kevin had made from the plants that he'd spotted down by the river would help to save Miranda's life. Officer Emmett pulled Kevin aside and asked him, "Did you make that herbal pill you gave me yourself? And also the one you gave to my fiancé?" "Well, you never asked," Kevin replied as he shrugged his shoulders. Officer Emmett didn't know what to say when she heard his answer. Time passed by slowly as they all waited to see if Miranda would show any improvement. About a half an hour later, she started to look a little more normal, but she still hadn't opened her eyes. "Kevin, what's going on?" Dalton asked anxiously. "Don't worry. She's doing fine. I think she'll pull out of this in about 10 minutes, Kevin said confidently. "Okay, then let's wait a little longer," Dalton said as he nodded his head. "Don't believe this bum, my friend. I'm sure the concoction he made isn't doing anything at all," Blair said to Dalton. "And you're saying this based on your vast knowledge of herbal remedies?" Dalton shot back as he glared at him. Blair didn't dare to say anything else. Jason interrupted to say to Kevin, "I still think you're a troublemaker. Why the hell did you have us burn our clothes when the chefs had set up a perfectly good grill?" Kevin looked at him and shook his head. "That shows what little you know, Jason. The grill's charcoal would have put a lot of toxic substances on the roots I was preparing. But your fancy clothes were made of 100% cotton, a lot cleaner to burn." This seemed to satisfy the onlookers, and Jason backed off so he wouldn't look even more foolish. He'd get even with Kevin later. While they were waiting, the sky suddenly turned dark, and a cool breeze blew across the campsite, making the trees start to sway back and forth. "It looks like it's going to rain," Officer Emmett said. "No way. Even if we get some rain, it shouldn't be a thunderstorm. After all, it's almost autumn," Matilda Jones pointed out as she looked up at the sky. "I wouldn't be so sure of that," Kevin said very seriously. "It's still pretty warm out. I think we should move to higher ground so we can be safe from any flooding." "Sherwin, do you have any people to help move the campsite?" Dalton asked very soberly. "Don't worry, Dalton. The tents are perfectly fine right here," Blair said very assuredly. Right at that moment, Kevin looked up at the sky and frowned. "Kevin, what's wrong?" Phoebe asked inquisitively. "I can't believe they sent up our tent so close to the river," Kevin said loudly. "Once it starts raining, the river will overflow its banks, and everything will be washed downstream, including us. And we don't have much time." "Kevin, you have no idea what you're talking about," Blair rebuked him. "It's too late in the season for that to happen." Dalton ignored Blair and asked Kevin, "Are you sure about that? Do you know about meteorology too?" "I know a little about it. You should really move Miranda to higher ground while she recuperates. I'll get Lily to do the same." Then Kevin turned around and looked at Blair. "Do you have any extra tents? I need one of them." Seeing how serious Kevin looked, a lot of the campers started to whisper to each other. They couldn't believe he was showing off again. After all, there were never any serious thunderstorms this late in the season. Lily heard the comments from everyone and started to doubt Kevin once again. Then Dalton looked Kevin in the eyes and thought for a moment. He agreed that it was getting too late in the year to have a summer thunderstorm, but Kevin had already been right twice today, so he gave him the benefit of the doubt. "Give Kevin a tent," Dalton said coldly. He didn't have to bother being polite to Blair. Kevin looked up at the sky again and commented, "I think we've got about 20 minutes before the storm gets here. Unfortunately, nobody can get a strong enough signal to check a weather app. I'm guessing we'll just have enough time to get to higher ground and set up shelter. Does anyone want to go with us?" "All right, Kevin, stop messing around," Lily warned him. "Are you coming with me or not?" Kevin didn't have time to explain it all to Lily. He turned around and asked again, "Isn't anyone else coming along?" Kevin didn't really like these people, but their lives were at stake. He waited, but nobody answered him. They just stared at him like he was full of crap. "Kevin, that's enough," Lily pleaded with him helplessly. From Lily's point of view, Kevin was taking advantage of their relationship. but just the thought of this made her feel embarrassed and she started to blush a little. "Lily, you have to trust me. There isn't much time left." Kevin looked at Lily and was confused to see her blushing. The rest of the group didn't believe Kevin knew anything about the weather and figured his luck had to run out soon. They didn't see any need to follow him and pitch their tents in another spot. While they were all discussing amongst themselves, Phoebe walked up with her brother Blake. "Kevin, I believe you. I'll go up the hill with you," Phoebe said confidently. "What are you talking about, sis?" Blake said somewhat anxiously. "It's way too dangerous in those woods." A few other members of her family agreed and tried to persuade her to stay where they were, but Phoebe didn't pay any attention to them. She just stared at Kevin with a determined look in her eyes. She didn't care whether Kevin would make a big deal out of it or not. What was important was that she had to support him right now. The group tried to warn her not to go with him. One of them even said, "Just because he lucked out and made some herbal drink doesn't mean he knows what he's talking about. Stay here where it's safe." They all tried to stop her from going. Blair walked quickly up to Kevin and said loudly, "I know why you're doing this, Kevin. You know that your herbal cure isn't going to help Miranda. So now you're trying to sneak out of here before Dalton figures it out and gets his hands on you." A lot of the other campers nodded in agreement, and this really made Kevin angry. Here he was trying to help these people, but they kept mocking him and calling him names. Were they ever going to listen to his advice without complaining? "Get out of my way," Kevin said coldly. "What? Am I right? So now you're angry because you know I'm telling the truth," Blair said with a proud smile. He knew that he couldn't let Kevin leave. By now, everyone was convinced that Blair was right and that Kevin was trying to run away. They just couldn't figure out why he'd asked Dalton to bring his wife along with him. But they tried to keep him from leaving anyway. "I said, get out of the way. I don't have the time to waste with you here," Kevin said quickly. He had to set up the tent before the storm arrived, and he didn't want Lily, Miranda, and Phoebe to get soaked by the rainstorm that was on the way. "Okay, Kevin, now that I've exposed you for what you really are, why don't you go and apologize to Dalton? Admit that you were wrong," Blair said boastfully. "Blair, do you have your head on straight? If I wanted to run away, would I ask Dalton to come along with me?" Kevin's patience had reached its limit. Blair started to reply, but Kevin stopped him as he opened his mouth. "Just leave us alone. I don't want to have to come down here and save you later," Kevin said frankly. "What? What did you just say? The wind's blowing too hard. I didn't hear you clearly," Blair said sarcastically. "And by the way, I don't need help from someone like you." Kevin ignored Blair. Just as he was about to head towards the woods with his equipment, Blair put out his arm and stopped him. "Dalton, it looks like we'll need to deal with this guy first before we can head to higher ground," Kevin said grimly. "That's easy, Kevin," Dalton said. Then he turned to Blair and said very firmly, "Get the hell out of the way right now. I'll only tell you once." This scared the crap out of Blair, and he immediately stepped aside to let Kevin move past him. Kevin picked up 2 backpacks and 2 tents now that Dalton and his wife were joining them. Just as he was about to head towards the wood with Lily and the others, he suddenly turned around and looked at Blair and said to him, "Don't do me any more favors." "You son of a bitch!" Blair couldn't take it anymore. He balled up his fists and started to move toward Kevin, but Officer Emmett suddenly pulled him back. "Kelly, are you still standing up for this piece of trash?" Blair asked her in surprise. "I'm doing this for your own good. This camping trip was organized by your family. If you were to fight with Kevin," she paused for a moment and said, "are you really willing to let everyone see your family as some kind of a joke?" Officer Emmett was obviously disappointed in Sherwin. Although she wanted to leave with Kevin and his group, she decided to stay because she also thought that there wasn't much chance of a big storm this time of year. "Dalton, let's get going now. The rain will start very soon and we won't have much time to set up our tents," Kevin said very seriously. "Okay, Please ask Lily to take care of my wife while we set up the tents together, Dalton replied. The land in that part of Illinois was fairly flat, but luckily there were rolling hills near there and the river was in a very slight valley that extended up into the woods. After about 10 minutes, Kevin found a good place to set up the new campsite. With Dalton's help and the simple tents that they'd brought along, the two of them were able to set it up very quickly. Suddenly, Lily said loudly, "Kevin, Dalton, come here. Miranda just woke up." When Dalton heard her, he immediately abandoned Kevin, who was cutting down some vines, and ran to Miranda. "Dalton, what happened to me?" Miranda said weakly. "It was all my fault. That fruit I gave you was poisonous. Luckily, Kevin saved you," Dalton said nervously as he hugged Miranda tightly. Watching the tender scene between the two of them, Lily subconsciously shifted her gaze to Kevin. Kevin was now gathering the vines together, and it looked like he was getting ready to use them for something. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning streaked across the sky, followed by rumbling thunder and a wild gust of wind. "Did I just see lightning? I can't believe we're stuck in the woods during a thunderstorm," Phoebe said in a panic. "Damn it, Kevin, you were right," Dalton shouted as he used his body to protect Miranda from the wind. "Don't thank me yet. Go ahead and take your wife into the smaller tent. I'll join Lily and Phoebe in the other one," Kevin said as he used the vines to tie the tents more tightly to the stakes. Soon the five of them split into two groups and went into their respective tents. But when Kevin entered the tent with Lily and Phoebe, the atmosphere immediately got very awkward. "Kevin, why did you only bring 2 tents for the 5 of us?" Lily asked as she started to blush. "Lily, I only have 2 hands. How many tents and backpacks do you want me to carry?" Kevin protested. Lily couldn't think of what to say. She just knew it felt really inappropriate for the 3 of them to share a tent. Suddenly there was another flash of lightning and a loud thunderclap. It really gave Lily and Phoebe a scare. "Looks like this rainstorm is even worse than I expected," Kevin said with a frown. "By the way, Kevin, I'm curious. How did you know it was going to rain?" Phoebe asked him after she came back to her senses. "Would you believe me if I told you that I also know astronomy and geography?" Kevin joked. Lily and Phoebe just rolled their eyes at him. The tent immediately fell into an awkward silence. The 3 of them didn't know what to say and just sat quietly listening to the sound of the rain outside. "Why don't the 2 of you chat a little? I need some rest," Kevin said as he yawned and stretched out on the sleeping mat. "Kevin, you don't plan to sleep in here, do you?" Lily asked awkwardly. "Well, you don't expect me to go out there, do you?" Kevin asked in surprise. "Are you sure? You'd really let me go out to get drenched in this downpour?" "This isn't about the rain. It's because Phoebe is one of the most eligible young women in Chicago, and she's never had a boyfriend. If you sleep in the same tent as us, people will find out, and it would ruin her reputation," Lily explained. It was very difficult for her to say this in front of Phoebe, but that's what she felt. How were they going to work this out? While most of the families decided to weather the storm at the campsite by the river, Kevin and Dalton took Lily, Phoebe, and Miranda to higher ground in the woods. But once the storm began and Kevin went into their tent, Lily didn't think it was appropriate for him to be in there with Phoebe. "What's the problem? We're not on a date, it's a tent. Do you want me to go out there and get soaked? Or should I throw Dalton and Miranda out of their tent?" Kevin complained. He really didn't understand what Lily was thinking. How could she be worried about Phoebe's reputation instead of thinking about her own husband's comfort? "That's okay, Lily. It's such a heavy rain and it really wouldn't be safe for Kevin to go outside," Phoebe said quietly. Plus, she really didn't find the idea of staying in the tent with Kevin all that unpleasant. "See, Lily, Phoebe doesn't mind," Kevin said with a smile. Lily was at a loss for words. She just rolled her eyes at Kevin. This whole situation really made her feel uneasy. After that, the 3 of them lay down quietly and waited for the storm to pass. After an hour, the thunderstorm still didn't show any sign of letting up. Suddenly, Kevin remembered something and leaned over. "Kevin, what's going on?" Lily, who wasn't able to sleep at all, asked him cautiously. "Did you guys hear something?" Kevin asked in alarm. Phoebe listened carefully and understood right away. "It sounds like someone is calling for help." "Not good," Kevin replied as he quickly opened the tent zipper. Lily and Phoebe heard Kevin complain as soon as he stepped outside. "Damn, it's pouring." The rain was certainly very heavy and Kevin could barely see where he was going. He called out to the other tent, "Dalton, are you asleep? If you're awake, follow me down the hill. I think the rest of our group's in trouble." Suddenly there was another loud thunderclap. It sounded like the sky was being ripped apart. "Kevin? Nope, I'm not asleep yet," Dalton said as he quickly came out of his tent. Kevin called out to the women in both tents, "You three should stay up here. Whatever you do, don't go down to the river." It took more than 10 minutes for Kevin and Dalton to find their way down to the main campsite. They were stunned by what they saw. The river had risen at least 6 feet. Not only did it wash away the tents, but there were also some trees that had fallen, forming a natural dam. The rest of the group was treading water and holding tightly to the trees and bushes by the shore. They were trying desperately not to be washed away by the water. Fortunately, they had all had swimming lessons in their fancy pools, so they were safe for the moment. But they couldn't hold on much longer. "Kevin, you really should go into business as a fortune teller," Dalton said as he gave his friend an admiring look. "We can talk about that later. For now, let's find a way to get them all up here," Kevin said very seriously. He looked around and found 2 long vines that must have been 5 inches in diameter. Kevin stood next to a tree and threw the vines down to them. "Hey, can you hear me?" he yelled down at them. "I just threw you some vines. Pull yourselves up with all your strength." When they heard this, they all looked up at Kevin. Some of them suddenly remembered what Kevin had said earlier. He really wasn't looking for an excuse to leave. Some even regretted not listening to Kevin's warning. "Mr. Williams, pull me up first. I'm too young to die," one of them yelled out. "Get me out of here. I promise I won't laugh at you anymore," another one called to him. They all started shouting frantically. Then another tree fell into the water and there was a loud scream. They were frightened out of their wits. Kevin and Dalton looked at each other and couldn't help shaking their heads. Sure, now they were being nice to Kevin. "Stop arguing and help each other climb up here. Ladies first," Kevin shouted to them. Then he saw Officer Emmett in the crowd and called out to her. "Why are you still waiting? Get up here." Officer Emmett was surprised when she heard this. She didn't expect that the first person Kevin saved would be her. But the vine had gotten very slippery from all the rain. It took Officer Emmett a long time to climb to safety. Just as she was about to lose her grip, Kevin reached out and grabbed her arm. Then he managed to get his other arm around her waist and helped her to the clearing. He'd saved her life. Seeing this, Blair, who was still in the water, suddenly shouted, "What are you doing, you son of a bitch? Watch where you put your hands." When Officer Emmett heard this, she got very angry with her fiancé. "What are you talking about, Sherwin? Just for that, you'll be the last one out," Kevin yelled. With Dalton's help, Kevin quickly pulled everyone to safety, except for Blair. Kevin was still feeling the effects of his fight with the cougar earlier in the day, and he felt waves of pain when his wounds reopened from all his effort. "Everyone, go up to the small clearing where we pitched our tents, and don't worry about the wild animals. They're smarter than some of us and have already found shelter," Kevin said while struggling to catch his breath. Then Kevin turned to Dalton and said, "Would you please lead the way? I'm sure they'd rather listen to you than to me." "Okay, no problem," Dalton replied. In fact, even without Dalton leading the way, everyone would have listened to Kevin at this point. They may have learned from their mistake. Kevin took a moment to catch his breath and wait for the pain to subside. Then he heard Blair yelling to him, "Kevin, what are you doing? Don't you see that I'm still down here? Hurry up and save me." "I'm sorry, Mr. Blair. After saving so many people, I don't have much strength left," Kevin shouted back. "Stop stalling. "You're just trying to get even with me, you son of a bitch," Blair shouted. Just then, another tree suddenly fell into the river. It was less than 6 feet away from Blair. This frightened him enough to make him see how much he needed Kevin's help, and he shouted, "Kevin, please save me. I don't want to die." "Kevin, I know everything that Blair's done to you, but please save him for my sake," Officer Emmett pleaded with him. Kevin stopped what he was doing and just stared at Officer Emmett. He realized that he didn't really have any intention of saving Blair. He was so tired of this arrogant bastard fighting with him and insulting him every time he tried to help him. He was the worst combination of arrogant and powerful. If he rescued Blair, Kevin was sure he'd still have trouble with him in the future. "Maybe I'll save him, but you have to say the magic word. Please," Kevin said very seriously. Immediately a smile appeared on Officer Emmett's face. She knew very well that Kevin was giving her a chance. "Please," Officer Emmett said shyly. "I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you," Kevin said with a grin. "Please, I beg you. Please save Sherwin as soon as you can," Officer Emmett replied. Blair, who was still treading water while he hung onto a branch, looked desperate. Kevin suddenly turned around and shouted down the slope to Blair, "Do you remember what you said to me?" "Kevin, that's enough," Blair screamed. "Since you've forgotten what you said, maybe you don't need my help after all," Kevin shouted to him. Then another branch suddenly fell next to Blair, scaring him so much that he almost lost his grip. "Kevin, please, I'm begging you to save me. I really don't want to die," he sobbed. He realized that he needed Kevin's help right now. He could get revenge on him later, once he was safe. "Are you sure you want to come up here in the woods?" Kevin shouted down to Blair. "You know there might be cougars here," Kevin taunted him. "Yes, I admit it. I arranged for someone to dress up in a cougar costume. Now please save me. I'm too young to die." Blair sounded like he was about to cry. "A fake cougar? It can't be. How could you do such a thing?" Kevin asked him. I wanted to look like a hero in front of Kelly, so I found someone to pretend to be a wild animal," Blair shouted back. Officer Emmett froze when she heard him say this. "Do you still want me to save him?" Kevin turned his head and asked Officer Emmett. She didn't answer Kevin's question. She just quietly turned around and walked away. "Consider yourself lucky," Kevin said as he threw the vine down to Blair. After he had climbed up the slope to safety, Blair saw Officer Emmett walking away. He didn't even say thank you to Kevin before chasing after her. When Kevin returned to the camp, Lily immediately jumped out of the tent. "Kevin, did you save them?" Lily said in disbelief. "Not all of them. Dalton also helped," Kevin said casually. "Kevin, I'm so proud of you," Lily said happily. Lily had already asked Dalton about the rescue when he came back to the tent leading the group. When she found out that it was Kevin who had saved everyone, Lily was stunned. As she thought about everything that had happened today, she simply couldn't believe that everyone still despised her husband and called him a loser. "It's still raining hard, and it's kind of chilly," Kevin said to Lily. "Why don't you go into the tent and rest?" Kevin ignored all of the people huddling under the bushes and headed back down the hill. Miranda had been poisoned by the golden fruit that Dalton had picked by mistake. Kevin knew that this kind of fruit was very rare, especially this far north. He didn't want any of them to be damaged by the floodwaters. When Kevin got down near the river, he looked around and finally found 2 trees that still had some undamaged fruit. It looked like there were about 20 that had survived. The night passed very quickly. The next day, nobody was really in the mood to play, so Blair's family managed to get where there was cell phone coverage to call for some limos to come pick them up early. Kevin and Lily rode back with Dalton and Miranda and a few other guests. After a few minutes, Dalton asked him, "Kevin, tell me honestly, how do you make such good predictions? You're like a prophet or something." Miranda, who was doing a lot better now, also looked at Kevin with interest. "I wouldn't go that far," Kevin replied nonchalantly. "I only read a few books about these subjects when I was bored. There were a couple of other people in the stretch limo, and they started whispering to each other. "Who does he think he is? He was just lucky." But because Dalton was in the car, they were careful not to say anything loudly enough for him to hear it. Suddenly, the driver slammed on the brakes, tossing the passengers around in their seats. They immediately started to complain to the driver. "Hey, where did you learn to drive?" and worse insults. "I'm very sorry about that, but there's a tree blocking the road," the driver said very apologetically. They all looked at where the driver was pointing, and sure enough, there was an enormous tree that had fallen across the road. There were also a few people standing in the road, scratching their heads and trying to figure out what to do. But Kevin thought to himself, something doesn't look right. As they were all leaving the campsite the next morning, the limo driver had to stop because a tree was blocking the road. When Kevin saw the people standing in the road looking at the downed tree, he had a bad feeling. Kevin suddenly said loudly, "We can't stay here. Turn around right away and find another way back to Chicago." His shouting immediately drew everyone's attention. There were a few passengers in the stretch limo other than Kevin's group and Dalton's. Of course, Sherwin Blair was riding with them too. As usual, they thought he was just showing off. One of them said, "What the hell are you shouting for? Who said you could give orders here, you jackass?" Kevin scowled when he heard what they were saying. Just then, the group of men in the road suddenly walked up to the stretch limo, and an anxious-looking man in his 30s asked them for help. "My uncle hurt his leg when the tree fell, and he needs to get to the hospital right away. Can you please help us?" Another man added, "We live nearby, and we were on our way to work when the tree fell." Then one of the other men, who had a strange expression on his face, said, "The traffic's really tied up because of the storm. It'll take way too long for an ambulance to get here. My uncle just can't wait that long." "Don't listen to them. We need to get out of here right now," Kevin said very seriously. Blair immediately turned around and sneered at him. "You piece of trash. Don't you have any conscience? Can't you see that someone's been injured?" Jason took on a really pompous tone and said, "Kevin, just because you're a loser, it doesn't mean you can't give someone a hand." "Driver, please listen to me. You have to turn around and get us out of here," Kevin repeated. The driver had no idea what to do. Everyone was telling him something different. Officer Emmett spoke up and ordered the driver, "Quick, open the door and let them in." "Don't open it," Kevin shouted anxiously. Now the driver was paralyzed, unsure which of them he should listen to. "Kevin, what are you doing?" Officer Emmett asked in confusion. She'd never known Kevin to be so cold and heartless. "Didn't you hear me? We need to leave," Kevin shouted again. He still hadn't explained why to Officer Emmett. Blair was very annoyed at Kevin and yelled, "Shut the hell up. Nobody wants to hear what you think." Then he shouted at the driver, "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and open the door." Kevin sighed helplessly, but none of them listened to him. As it turns out, he realized as soon as he saw the line of fallen trees that they hadn't been knocked down by the storm. Someone had deliberately cut them down. Plus, when one of the men knocked on the window, Kevin clearly saw a prison tattoo on the man's arm, partially covered by a sleeve. He could tell right away that these guys were definitely not ordinary farmers. "But we don't have any empty seats," Jason pointed out to them. Without waiting for Blair to agree, Kevin interrupted them. "I'll gladly give up my seat for them. Lily, Dalton, Miranda, Phoebe, why don't you guys get out of the car with me?" "How about if you just get out all by yourself, Kevin? Once you're gone, we can all make some room to squeeze them in," Jason said with a sneer. He really didn't want Kevin to share the ride with them anyway. Kevin ignored Jason and asked Dalton, "Do you want to join me?" "You know, I think it's kind of stuffy in here anyway. Why don't we all go out for a walk?" Dalton replied indifferently. "Blair, have another car pick us up later." "Lily, are you coming along or not?" Kevin asked his wife. "Kevin, what do you mean by all this? Don't you think my car can fit a few more people?" Blair said indignantly. In fact, Blair also wanted Kevin to get out of the limo. He still hadn't gotten over the embarrassment of yesterday's fiasco with the flood, but if Dalton got out of the car with Kevin, how would he look to everyone else? Lily was about to answer, but before she could say anything, Phoebe said, "Let's go, Kevin. I'll go with you." The moment she said this, the men in Blair's group were very unhappy. Why was she going along with Kevin, this worthless deadbeat, instead of staying with them? What kind of logic was that? But when Lily heard Phoebe volunteer so enthusiastically, she felt very uneasy. "I'll get out too," Lily finally said. Now Blair's group of friends was really disappointed. They continued to hurl insults at Kevin as he opened the door to get out. As they were stepping out of the limo, Kevin turned around and said to Blair and the others, "If you need any help later, don't come crawling to me." Blair shouted back, "Go on, get out of here. We're trying to help some people and you're just running away. Who needs you?" "Blair, I want another car here for us in an hour," Dalton said brusquely. "But Dalton, But before Blair could finish answering, Dalton got out of the car. By now, Dalton considered Kevin to be his brother. But how could he tolerate seeing these people mocking Kevin all the time? He held back, though, because his wife was there. Out of all the people who were taunting Kevin just now, Blair was the loudest. Dalton was tempted to make an example out of him. "I'm really ashamed that you're part of the Jones family, even though it's only by marriage. I can't believe you're not willing to help these men," Jason said with disdain. But Kevin didn't care what they thought. He just turned a deaf ear. It still amazed him that they kept insulting him, even though he'd done so many things to help them. After Kevin and the others got out of the limo, Blair and Jason enthusiastically helped the men bring the injured man inside. Actually, Officer Emmett had wanted to leave with Kevin, but she figured that it was her duty to offer assistance to the injured man. And on top of that, she was still seeing Blair. If she left with Kevin, how would that make her fiancé look? "That Kevin is a real good-for-nothing. How could he refuse to give a ride to an injured man?" Blair said angrily as he looked at the man's leg. The guy's pants had a huge red stain. "Don't worry about him," Jason said. Then he turned to the driver and ordered him, "Close the door quickly." Once the door was closed, Jason turned to the men and said, "You guys are lucky you ran into us. Otherwise, you'd be in trouble." "Thank you. Thank you very much," the man replied with a cold smile. Then he pulled a very sharp knife out of his jacket and said menacingly, "Nobody move. I know how to use this and I'd hate to have to hurt you." "What the hell are you doing?" Blair was dumbstruck. The others didn't know what was going on. "What are we doing? Let me explain. This is a robbery," the man with the injured leg said as he pulled out a knife and held it to Blair's neck. "Don't move if you value your life." "What are you doing? We were trying to help you," Officer Emmett said in disbelief. "I've already thanked you for that," the injured man said with a cold smile. "But my friends and I need some money. As long as you follow our instructions and hand over all the money you have, I guarantee that you'll all be just fine." "Screw you!" Jason shouted loudly. "Is this how you treat people who try to help you?" Just as Jason finished speaking, one of the other men slapped his mouth and put a knife against his neck, too. "Are you a little slow? My uncle wasn't injured at all. There's no need for you to save him," the man said rudely. "But you have been a great help. You know, if the two of you hadn't insisted on letting us in, our plan wouldn't have succeeded." When he said that, Blair, Jason, and the others started to panic. They led such pampered lives, how could they have predicted something like this? "Now do as we say and hand over your money," the man they kept calling their uncle said impatiently. "I don't want to have to say it again. My patience is wearing thin." Now Blair and the others understood why Kevin had reacted the way he did. He could see that there was something wrong with these guys, but he hadn't explained it to them. The funny thing was that Jason and Blair thought they were doing a good deed, but they didn't know that they were being tricked. Officer Emmett decided to take action. She said to the men, "You're real scum. I'm Lieutenant Emmett of the Chicago Police Department. If you know what's good for you, you'll drop your knives and surrender." "Ooh, Lieutenant Emmett of the Chicago PD," the man said sarcastically. "I'm really scared. Wow, you almost frightened me to death." Officer Emmett was about to say something else when the thief interrupted her and viciously replied, "I don't give a shit who you are." She gritted her teeth but didn't say anything more. She was skilled enough to beat these guys all by herself, but the space was really small and pretty crowded. What if she ended up injuring someone by accident? "All you have to do is hand over your cash, and I'll spare your lives," the man snarled. One of the other men took out a black bag and held it out to them. "You're not getting anything from us," Blair said angrily. He was furious. He'd already disappointed Officer Emmett by having someone disguise himself as a cougar so he could act like he was saving everyone. That's why he'd fought with Kevin just now. He wanted his fiancée to see that he was actually very compassionate, but how could he have known that this group of men were planning to rob them? Unfortunately, the man wasn't in the mood to listen to Blair and gave him a powerful blow to the gut. The intense pain made Blair double over. "Will you shut up now, you wimp?" the man said disdainfully. "If you say another word, I'll cut out your tongue." They were all so shocked to hear these threats. Everyone began to wish they'd gotten out and taken a walk with Phoebe and the others. "Listen, if all you want is money, that's okay, but we don't do a lot of cash business. We don't have much on us right now," Jason tried to explain. "Are you kidding me?" one of the robbers said callously. Then he kneed Jason in the stomach and shoved him against the window, causing it to crack. Jason's face suddenly turned pale. "Don't do it," one of the men suddenly shouted. He hadn't said anything until now, but he looked like he was the leader of the gang. "I know you're all very wealthy. Otherwise, we wouldn't have deliberately waited here for you," the man went on. "So if you don't have any cash, we'll just take everything else. Put all your phones, jewelry, watches, and other valuables in the bag." The man suddenly paused. His gaze swept across everyone's faces before he continued. "I'll bet you don't wear any cheap knockoffs, am I right?" Suddenly the man stepped on Jason's wrist, making him cry out in pain. "Were you trying to hide this?" the man growled as he snatched a very glitzy watch from Jason's wrist. This really upset Jason. His watch was a rose gold Chopard worth at least $400,000, and he loved to flash it around. Jason wanted so much to grab it back from the man, but he just didn't have the strength. Could this day get any worse? After Kevin, Lily, and their friends got out of the limo, Jason let the group of men get in so they could drive them to the hospital. But it turned out they didn't need help at all. They were robbers. The gang's leader ripped Jason's watch right off his wrist. "That's what I expected from a rich kid like you. I'll bet this watch is worth a few $100,000, the man said happily. As soon as he said this, the man who was holding the bag suddenly got very excited. "Quick, hand it over to me." The group of robbers were very happy. It looked like they could get at least $1 million from their rich victims. With that much money, it would be easy to change their identities and move to another town. "It's best if you hand your things over willingly. Don't force us to search you, okay? If you resist, things could get a lot worse," the group's leader said coldly. Officer Emmett felt horrible about this, but she couldn't figure out how Kevin could stand up to bank robbers but not get involved in this situation. But she couldn't dwell on that right now. Blair and the rest of them were very reluctant to take off their valuables and put them in the black bag. Finally, the gang leader said again, "Thank you for your cooperation. We only have one more request. In 1 minute, you're going to get out of the car and stand outside." What choice did they have? They all got out of the car and split up into 2 rows according to the robbers' instructions. The thieves made them hold their hands on their heads like they were under arrest. Some of the more fearful people in the group started to shake. Then the leader of the gang smiled lewdly and reached out to touch Officer Emmett's face. It looked like he had other things in mind than just a robbery. "Get lost, you scum," Officer Emmett said in disgust as she slapped the man's hand away. "So, "You'd rather play the martyr," he said. Then he turned around and put his knife on the neck of one of the men from Jason's group. "I know how to handle martyrs. You're a police officer, aren't you? Then you're responsible for the safety of everyone here. If you resist me again, this man dies." The man started to tremble even more when he heard this and felt like he was going to faint. Officer Emmett tightly clenched her fists. With her martial arts skills, dealing with these robbers wouldn't be a problem at all. But now, there were hostages to worry about. Almost subconsciously, Officer Emmett looked over at Blair, but he was too scared to offer any resistance. She was disappointed to see him like that. The leader was very pleased with himself. He reached out to touch Officer Emmett again, but as he extended his hand, someone seized it firmly. "Who the hell are you?" the man roared as he turned his head to see who had grabbed his wrist. "If you're going to rob us, then just do it and move on. Try anything else and you'll regret it," Kevin warned him. After Kevin had left with the others, he asked Dalton to protect Lily, Phoebe, and Miranda so he could run back to the limo. "Do you have a death wish?" the man yelled furiously. Then he slashed at Kevin with his knife. Kevin grunted and gave the man a quick, powerful sidekick in the gut, sending him flying 10 feet away. "You guys are the worst robbers I've ever seen," Kevin scoffed. "Kevin, quick, save me!" Jason yelled excitedly. He remembered what Kevin had done to Merriweather and he knew that he could rescue them from these robbers. "You should have kept running instead of coming back here to die," the man growled as he got up from the ground. "What are you still standing there for? Hurry up and kill this bastard!" The man turned around and shouted at the other robbers. Hearing this, they immediately rushed towards Kevin. "Kevin, be careful!" Officer Emmett cried out in alarm. "Don't worry," Kevin replied to her, but he didn't retreat. Instead, he took a step forward towards the men. When the first man threw a punch at Kevin, he deflected it and then punched him in the stomach. The man dropped to his knees, unable to breathe. When the other men saw Kevin take out their best fighter so quickly, they stopped in their tracks. Jason, Blair, and the others also stared in disbelief. Was Kevin really that powerful? "Is he okay?" the second robber asked frantically. Before the man could answer, Kevin kneed him in the chest. "He's just going to take a little nap," Kevin said. After letting out a muffled groan, the man lay down on the ground and didn't move at all. "Shut the hell up!" the second man screamed as he raised his knife and quickly rushed towards Kevin. Then he slashed at Kevin's head. The strike could have killed him, but in the next second, Kevin grabbed the man by the wrist and kicked him hard in the shin. There was a cracking sound as the bone snapped. Then Kevin quickly reached out his other hand and grabbed him by the waist. He lifted his attacker up and threw him at the other two men. The three of them fell to the ground in a heap. The one who had tried to kill Kevin lay on the ground holding his broken legs, screaming in agony. After seeing the four armed robbers fall to the ground so quickly, Blair jumped up in excitement and shouted, "What a beautiful fight!" The hostages smiled as they saw a glimmer of hope. A couple even started to cheer Kevin on. But their hopes were dashed when they heard a gunshot suddenly ring out. The head of the gang had shot out one of the windows of the limo. "Why don't you try that with me, you son of a bitch?" The man snarled ferociously as he pointed his gun at Kevin. "Hey, I didn't know you were carrying any guns with you," Kevin replied without flinching. Instead, he said calmly, "Why don't you try to shoot me instead of an innocent car? Let's see if you can hit me." "Are you actually daring me to shoot you?" he asked contemptuously. "Do you want to try?" Kevin asked jokingly as he furrowed his brow. "Kevin!" Officer Emmett shouted anxiously when she heard him say this. Of course, she saw through Kevin's strategy. It was the same thing he'd done during the bank robbery. He was trying to draw the man away so he wouldn't hurt the others. Kevin was very casual about it. He waved at Officer Emmett and then said to the gang's leader, "If you don't shoot me now, you may not get another chance." "Go to hell," the man shouted as he pulled the trigger. As the gunshot rang out, blood burst from Kevin's shoulder. Fortunately, it wasn't in a vital organ. Kevin grunted and his face turned pale. "Go to hell," the man yelled again. He didn't want Kevin to get off so easily. Just as he was about to fire a second time, Dalton showed up and grabbed the man's arm forcefully. Then he gave him a solid punch to the head. The man dropped immediately to the ground unconscious. "Kevin!" Lily and Phoebe exclaimed almost at the same time as they quickly ran over to him. "Are you okay?" Dalton called out in concern, but then he saw the other two men getting up off the ground. "You deserve to die," Dalton shouted as he clenched his fist and ran toward the two men. He knocked them both out in 2 swings. Just then, the one whose leg Kevin had broken pulled a pistol out of his pocket. Perhaps it was because he was in such pain from his broken leg, but he wasn't able to steady the gun when he fired it, and he ended up shooting Kevin in the back. "Damn it!" Dalton shouted when he saw this. He ran over to the man and kicked the gun out of his hand. Then he knocked him out cold. That's when Kevin fell to the ground. While he was unconscious, Kevin felt like he was having a long dream. When he woke up, he found himself in a hospital. "Kevin, you finally woke up," Lily said excitedly as she grabbed his right hand. She had been at his bedside all night. "How long have I been unconscious?" Kevin asked. His face still looked very pale. "You've been here for a day and night," Lily sobbed. During the whole time, Lily had been afraid that Kevin would never wake up. "Kevin, promise me one thing. In the future, if we ever get in the same situation again, don't be so brave, okay? The doctor said the bullet struck close to your heart, less than 2 inches away." Lily's voice became softer and softer as she spoke. Her eyes were red from all her crying. "Lily, please don't cry. If you cry, you'll just make me sad," Kevin said with a bitter smile. He knew that he had to do what he did to keep the others from being hurt. "I don't care. You must promise me. If something happened to you, I don't know what I'd do," Lily said shyly. Hearing this made Kevin happy. "Okay, I promise," Kevin said as he forced a smile. "I'm sorry I scared you." After a moment, he said, "Let me give you a kiss." "I don't want to," Lily said as she immediately stopped crying and took a step back from the hospital bed. Kevin shook his head in confusion. Then he looked around the room and asked her, "Lily, where are we? I didn't know hospitals around here were so luxurious." "This is a private hospital opened by the Steele family. Speaking of which, you really have to thank Dalton Steele. If he hadn't invited the best doctor, your surgery wouldn't have gone so smoothly," Lily told him. She was still afraid he wouldn't survive the shooting. "Where's Dalton now?" Kevin asked. Of course, Dalton hadn't forgotten him, but he had some preparations to take care of. "It's his grandfather's birthday in 2 days," Lily explained. "Dalton is busy taking care of the guests in his home. He also said that when you wake up, I should give him a call." As Lily spoke, she took out her phone. Kevin looked up at the ceiling. Even though he'd just been critically injured, he was grateful to have made a friend like Dalton. After Lily finished the call, Kevin asked her, "Do you know where Dalton's home is?" "Why? Do you want to go over there? I think you need to recover from your injuries." "Anyway, he just said that he'd be right over," Lily said worriedly. While this was going on, Mitchell Cook, Adriana Wright, and the other 3 were sitting together in a private room in the Whistler Hotel. They were discussing their plans for an ecological garden. They were interrupted by the crash of the room's door being kicked open. Thomas Williams, Kevin's uncle, looked at them with a furious expression in his eyes. "Who the hell are you? Get out of here immediately!" Cook shouted fiercely. "Who do you think you are? How dare you yell at me?" Thomas Williams growled at him. "You're just Kevin's flunkies. What are you doing eating in such a nice hotel?" Mitchell was irritated to hear him talking like this. "Who the hell are you? How dare you behave so shamefully in my hotel?" "My name is Thomas Williams," he said proudly. "If Kevin were here, he'd have to answer to me. That gives you an idea of my importance." Adrian and the others looked at each other in disbelief when they heard him say this. They knew right away who he was. "So what if you're from the Williams family? This is Chicago, not New York. You're a long way from home," Emo Squire said seriously. "Is that supposed to be a warning?" Thomas said gravely. "Take them all away. Let's see how long Kevin survives without his buddies. They had no idea what Thomas had in mind. Kevin's uncle Thomas burst into the meeting at the Whistler Hotel and ordered his men to take Cook, Adriana, and the others hostage. He was trying to weaken Kevin's position by removing his friends from the equation. "What right do you have to do this to us?" Gilbert said as he struggled against the grip that one of Thomas's bodyguards had put on him. "And what right do you have to help Kevin?" Thomas snarled. "You don't know what's good for you, and you've been siding with Kevin against the entire Williams family. Now Grandpa's given me the order for me to come here to Chicago to handle this. I'll take you all back to New York as our guests." "Grandpa Williams? You mean Randall Williams?" Cook asked in surprise. How could anyone not know who Randall Williams was? The Williams family was the most wealthy family and powerful one in New York, and Randall was the pillar of the family. However, he hadn't been seen in public in years. Thomas didn't want to waste any more time with Mitchell Cook. He told his men, "Take him away." Then he turned around and walked towards the door. When he got to the main hall, Drake saw Thomas walking towards him. "Who the hell are you? What are you doing here?" Drake asked when he saw Cook and the others being held against their will. "Take care of them," Thomas said. He didn't even look at Drake as he continued to walk out of the hotel. Just when Drake was about to lose his temper and stop Thomas, he felt someone touch his shoulder. "Who are you?" Drake roared impatiently. He saw a man standing menacingly in front of him. The man quickly struck Drake in the chest with the palm of his hand, sending him flying and crashing into several tables. Drake was in intense pain from the blow. He got up from the floor and shouted at his bodyguards, "Kill him!" "You overestimate yourself," the man replied ominously. Before the men could respond to Drake's order, the man leapt into the middle of them. In a few quick moves, he knocked them all to the floor. Thomas suddenly stopped in the doorway. He turned around, looked Drake in the eyes, and said, "I'll spare your life. Go and tell Kevin that if he cares about these people's lives, he should go back to New York City. Alone. I'll wait for him in the main hall of the Williams mansion." Then Thomas waved his hand at his guard. The man understood what he meant. He quickly went up to Drake and knocked him out with a single punch. When the onlookers saw this, they immediately started whispering to each other, trying to figure out what was going on. Who the hell are these people? Did that guy just hit Drake? They wondered. They were too frightened to do anything but watch. After Thomas left with his men, the Whistler Hotel staff checked Drake to see if he was okay while one of them called an ambulance. They knew very well that anyone who could take Cook and Adriana away like that was someone they didn't want to mess with. While all this was going on, Dalton Steele was just arriving at the hospital. When he saw Kevin sitting up in his bed, he smiled broadly. "Hey, Kevin, I knew you'd pull through, and you were right about everything," Dalton said happily. "I hope I can get out of here soon," Kevin said dejectedly. "You're lucky you're not dead," Dalton said with great concern. Kevin didn't want to argue with him about this. Then he asked, "Do you have a lot of guests to take care of? What are you doing here with me?" "Those people don't need my help with anything. Besides, I'd rather be here cheering you up," Dalton said candidly. Kevin was a little irked when he heard Dalton say this, and he was tempted to turn away from him. "Hey, I don't need any help, and I don't need any cheering up," Kevin said irritably. "Hey, it's not the same thing," Dalton said as he scratched his head. Before Kevin could answer, Dalton said, "My grandfather, Norman Steele, asked me to invite you to come over to our house." Lily looked at Dalton in shock. She couldn't believe what she just heard. The Steele family was very important in the Chicago region, and even though Norman Steele had long since retired from business, he still had a lot of clout. Lily knew that Kevin could really move up in the world if he impressed the man. "For your grandfather's birthday? Of course I'll go," Kevin said with a smile. "That's great. I'm happy to see you're doing better. By the way, my family actually owns this hospital. If you need anything at all, don't be afraid to ask. They'll take care of you," Dalton said as he patted Kevin on the shoulder. Then he added, "Let's have a drink after you get out of here." "Are you leaving already?" Kevin teased Dalton. "What am I, chopped liver?" "Come on, Kevin. Who said I'm leaving?" Dalton replied calmly. "By the way, when you recover from your injuries, I have something very important to tell you. I've got big plans for us, brother. Why can't you tell me now? This is a private room, after all, Kevin urged him. Okay, why not? Dalton said as he walked to the door and looked around. After making sure that there was no one within earshot, he closed the door and went back to sit down next to Kevin's hospital bed. On the 23rd of this month, there will be an important competition, an entrance exam. If you pass it, you can enter the Advanced Herbal Medicine program at the Chicago School for the Natural Healing Arts, Dalton said in a low voice. From what I heard, they only have 15 slots, but anyone can take the exam. What does this have to do with me? It's not like I'm planning to go there, Kevin asked hesitantly. I thought you just might be interested. You know how everyone's trying to find herbal and natural ways to improve their strength and sharpness. Anyone who finishes this program is guaranteed to be very successful, Dalton explained. Then he added excitedly, if you do really well there, the sky's the limit. Don't tell me you don't think you're already a success, Kevin said as he gave Dalton a puzzled look. Although they hadn't known each other for a long time, Dalton didn't strike Kevin as being greedy. Who said I don't feel like a success? But Kevin, you have no idea how important this is. It could really give your career a boost, Dalton said enthusiastically. They have some of the best teachers in the world, real experts, Dalton continued. Then he put his hand on Kevin's shoulder and said, I saw what you did to help my wife. Just from what you learned on your own, imagine what you could do with the right guidance. Lily had been sitting patiently on the armchair in the corner, and she had no idea what the two of them were talking about. Okay, Dalton, let's talk about this later. I think we must be boring the heck out of Lily right now, Kevin said as he turned to look at his wife. Okay. The exam's not for another 10 days anyway, Dalton agreed. Most people had no idea any of this was going on and just took the regular vitamins and minerals that their doctors gave them. But what Dalton was talking about was on another level altogether. Kevin, why don't you just get out of that bed? I've got nothing going on right now. Come on over to my house and we'll sit down and talk. Dalton invited him warmly. No problem, Kevin answered as he lifted his blanket. Are you really okay? Lily asked worriedly. I'm fine, Lily. You know how tough I am. I mean, I was only shot twice, Kevin boasted. If you don't believe me, we can try to consummate our marriage tonight. Don't embarrass me, Kevin, Lily said shyly. Kevin smiled and slowly got out of bed with some help from Dalton. The three of them left the hospital together, and Dalton drove straight to the Steele family's mansion. On the way, Kevin sent Miss Wilson a message asking her to have some gifts sent over. After all, this was the first time he was going to Dalton's house, and he was even going to meet his grandfather, the famous Norman Steele. How could he possibly go there empty-handed? About an hour later, the three of them pulled up in front of the mansion and walked inside. Norman Steele was sitting at the head of the table, chatting happily with the guests who had come to see him. Among the many guests, Kevin spotted an acquaintance. It was Tucker, whom he had recently seen at his class reunion. Kevin, come over here and let me introduce you. This is my grandfather, Norman Steele, Dalton said eagerly. Grandpa, this is my friend Kevin. Norman smiled and nodded at Kevin. It's nice to meet one of my grandson's friends. Have a seat and enjoy yourself. Thank you, sir, Kevin said politely. After that, he took Lily over to introduce her to Tucker. Hey, Tucker, I didn't expect to meet you here. And I didn't expect to see the Jones family's infamous lazy son-in-law, Tucker replied coldly. A few of the guests heard this and started to whisper to each other. They'd heard about Kevin from the rumors Jason had been spreading around town. The way he was dressed didn't help make a good first impression either. Dalton pretended not to hear what they were saying. He walked over to Kevin and Tucker and asked with a smile, Are you two friends? Before Kevin could say anything, Tucker answered first. You must be joking. Who would be friends with trash like him? After saying that, Tucker took a long look at Dalton and then glanced over at Lily. Actually, Tucker was mainly there for two reasons. The first was to help his sister give Norman Steele a gift so that she could make a connection with the family and get a job in one of their companies. Second, he wanted to make friends with Dalton. After all, he was a well-known figure in Chicago. Tucker thought that if he could become friends with him, it would help him to get ahead. However, Tucker had never thought that he would run into Kevin at a Steele family party. "Please forgive me, Mr. Steele. I have to excuse myself." After saying this, Tucker turned around and left, as if he didn't want anyone to know that he had some kind of relationship with Kevin. "Who was that, Kevin?" Lily asked as Tucker walked away. "No one. He's just a mixed-up guy I know from school," Kevin replied faintly. Tucker immediately stopped when he heard him say that. He turned his head to look at Kevin and said loudly, "What did you just say, scumbag? You're nobody. How dare you say something like that about me?" "I can say anything I want, loudmouth," Kevin said contemptuously. This was upsetting for Kevin. He hadn't provoked Tucker, but here the guy was trying to embarrass him in front of everybody. So Kevin figured he didn't have to be nice to him anymore. "You're a nobody," Tucker snarled. "You wouldn't even be here today if you hadn't married into the Jones family." Then Tucker sneered and said, "Haven't you come here with your wife to give Mr. Steele a gift?" "Oh, really? Aren't you also here to give the gentleman a gift?" Kevin laughed mockingly. "I haven't heard about you making a name for yourself lately. How can you afford to get Mr. Steele a decent present?" "I'm here to offer my sister's gift on her behalf," Tucker said proudly. "Your sister? So then the gift really isn't from you," Kevin said with a sneer. The people around them immediately reacted to this. How could Tucker be showing off like this when he hadn't even brought his own gift for Grandpa Steele? This got Tucker even angrier. "So what's it to you? You're such a jerk that you don't even deserve to know her name." "What? You really don't think I know who your sister is?" Kevin asked in a mocking tone. After all, he knew just about everybody at his old school. But Kevin had an even bigger surprise in store for Tucker. Although Tucker was pretty much a nobody in this crowd, his sister had a wonderful reputation and nobody wanted to say anything that would upset her. As for Kevin, everybody had heard the nasty things Jason Jones had been saying about him. Grandpa Steele had been watching all of this from his comfortable chair. As he looked at Kevin, he seemed to be in deep thought. It was as if he could see a little bit of his younger self in Kevin's appearance. When he arrived in Chicago years ago, Norman had no money and no status, but he made up for it with guts and determination. So Grandpa Steele wanted to see what Kevin would do to turn the situation around. "Now that you mention it, I'm kind of curious. Who exactly is this sister of yours?" Kevin sneered. "Never mind. I'll just show you her gift and you'll know what kind of person she is," Tucker replied as he walked to the table and picked up an exquisite package. When he was finished speaking, Tucker opened the package and pulled out a beautiful set of Rolex watches. At first glance, it must have been worth a fortune. "Not bad. But you didn't pay for them yourself," Kevin said with a mocking smile. "Since I'm here to celebrate Norman Steele's birthday, I certainly wouldn't come empty-handed, unlike some people." Tucker glared at Kevin, and it was obvious he was talking about him. Then he took another present from the table and opened it. "This is an authentic bust of the Greek god Apollo from over 300 years ago. It's to remind everyone of your eternal reputation, Mr. Steele," Tucker said proudly. The guests were very impressed by this gift, which must have been worth $100,000. There was no way that Kevin could do better. And it was sure to help his sister get her foot in the door with the Steele's family business. Even Dalton walked over to take a closer look. He definitely appreciated the craftsmanship. As Kevin watched, his smile grew wider and wider. "What are you laughing at, you jackass? Did you bring anything that's worth this much?" Tucker said with disdain. "I'm laughing at you, Tucker. You don't even know how to choose a present," Kevin said as he slowly shook his head. "Did you actually bring this thing to celebrate Mr. Steele's birthday? You'll be lucky if he doesn't smash it over your head." "Kevin, is there something we should know?" Dalton asked suspiciously. Kevin nodded his head but didn't answer Dalton's question right away. Instead, he said to Tucker, "Let me ask you, how much did you spend on this thing?" $110,000, Tucker said as he proudly lifted his chin. If this were a real 18th century bust of Apollo, that would be a fair price. Unfortunately, the box is probably worth about as much as your gift, Kevin said confidently. Kevin, don't talk nonsense, Lily said as she worriedly looked over at Norman Steele. What do you mean? Are you saying that this is a fake? Tucker said as he clenched his fists. Kevin smiled and looked at Tucker. Then he asked, Do you know where a bust like this would come from? Kevin, do you know how to appraise antiques? Dalton asked in surprise. Kevin nodded his head in response to Dalton's question. The original bust is actually in Italy, he explained. That's the first reason I know it's not authentic, Kevin continued. But also, if you look closely, it's not even really marble. It's probably a plaster cast that was coated in urethane and painted to look like marble. It would make a nice bathroom decoration, but it's certainly not a gift worthy of a distinguished person like Mr. Steele. You're talking nonsense. How can you be so sure this is a fake? Tucker roared loudly. He had actually bought it from one of his uncles. Tucker just couldn't believe that his uncle would lie to him and put him in an embarrassing position like this. Believe what you want, Kevin said smugly. He was tired of dealing with Tucker's nonsense. Kevin picked up the bust and dropped it lightly on the table. As everyone watched, the so-called marble bust broke apart into a dusty pile of plaster. The crowd gasped when they saw this. They'd all thought it was a genuine marble bust of Apollo from the 1700s. They were obviously wrong. I'm sorry I had to do that, Kevin said. But Mr. Steele had to find out sooner or later. Then he turned to look at Dalton. After thinking for a moment, Kevin said, The next thing I have to say may seem a little impolite. Are you sure you want me to say it? Before Dalton could answer, Grandpa Steele said, Go ahead, young man, just say it. I'm too old to care what people think. Thank you. That's very wise. I hate to have to say this, though. Kevin answered him politely. If you remember your mythology, Kevin explained, King Midas insulted the god Apollo and his ears were transformed into donkey ears as punishment. So there could actually be another meaning to this gift, especially for someone as wealthy as Mr. Steele. After saying this, Kevin turned around and looked Tucker in the eyes. Aside from the fact that this thing is fake, I have to ask you, why would you offer something like this on Grandpa Steele's birthday? When he heard this, Tucker's face turned pale, and sweat started to break out on his forehead. The members of the Steele family who were in the room were also very upset to hear this and turned to glare at Tucker. Tucker was desperate, and the only solution he could think of was to turn his attention back on Kevin. He pointed at him and shouted, Even if what you said is true, my intention was to help celebrate Mr. Steele's birthday. But what about you? He continued. Did you come here empty-handed? Then Tucker sneered and yelled, If it wasn't for your wife, I'll bet you wouldn't even know that today is his birthday. Am I right? Hey, who told you I didn't bring any gifts? Kevin laughed as he looked at Tucker mockingly. On the way to Dalton's mansion, he'd already sent a message to Miss Wilson. He figured that by now someone should be showing up with his gifts. How can a lowlife like you afford to offer anything interesting? Did you stop off at the gift shop at the mall on the way here? Tucker said with a sneer. That would still be better than what you brought, Kevin said calmly. Then why don't you show everyone right now? What kind of trash did you bring? Tucker said desperately. If there hadn't been such a big crowd, he really would have taken a swing at Kevin right now. Don't worry, we'll soon see, Kevin said as he crossed his arms in front of his chest. He wasn't worried at all. Kevin, what are you doing? We didn't bring anything, Lily whispered to him anxiously. They had just come out of the hospital and only found out a little while ago that today was Norman Steele's birthday. So where did Kevin find a present so quickly? Oh, someone's sending it over? Did you order takeout for him? The more Tucker spoke, the more scornfully he looked at Kevin. A lot of them laughed when Tucker said this. They believed Jason's lies and didn't expect much of anything from Kevin. What could he possibly have gotten for Grandpa Steele? Just then, there was a lot of commotion at the mansion's entrance, and someone announced, Director Lexi Belmont of Williams Media has arrived. Everyone looked over when they heard that. After all, Williams Media was extremely well respected in Chicago. They all wished that they had a business relationship with the company. Everyone watched Lexi walk into the room. She was wearing a very professional outfit, and she was carrying a large, bright red gift bag in her hand, as she walked quickly toward the head table. "Lexi, what are you doing here? Did you forget to tell me something? Why didn't you just give me a call?" Tucker welcomed his sister warmly. He was very puzzled by all of this. He was originally supposed to come here today with Lexi, but she had something to do at the last minute at work. So she asked him to pick up some gifts and give them to Mr. Steele on her behalf. He certainly didn't expect her to show up right now. But to everyone's surprise, Lexi didn't even look at Tucker. After placing the huge bag on the table, she quickly walked over to Kevin. "I'm sorry I'm late, Mr. Williams. I've brought the gifts that you asked me to prepare," Lexi said anxiously, as if she was afraid that Kevin would get angry. "That's fine. Actually, you're right on time," Kevin said with a smile. The crowd was shocked to see this. Had she just walked over and apologized to Kevin? Some of them thought they must have heard wrong. If Tucker had brought gifts for Grandpa Steele on her behalf, what was she doing bringing something for Kevin to offer him? But now they clearly heard Lexi call Kevin, the outcast of the Jones family, Mr. Williams. None of this made any sense. But Lexi ignored all the whispering. After hearing that Kevin wasn't upset with her, she gradually relaxed. "Thank you, Mr. Williams," she said graciously. "No need to thank me. I appreciate your help, and I'm glad that you got here so quickly," Kevin said casually. "Oh, the pleasure was all mine, Mr. Williams," Lexi replied. Lily felt her legs start to get weak when she heard this. Why was someone from the upper management of Williams Media being so respectful to Kevin? Tucker also stared in disbelief. His sister had worked her way up the corporate ladder, and it was only with her help that he had been able to get where he was today. But he had never seen his older sister being so courteous and respectful to anyone. Suddenly, Kevin asked slowly, "So, Tucker's your brother?" Yes, he is," Lexi answered politely. "That's nice. Your brother may not be very competent, but he sure knows how to bully someone," Kevin said seriously. Hearing this, Lexi was suddenly very embarrassed, and she stumbled to reply. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Williams. It's all my fault." This made Tucker angry. "Sis, why are you apologizing to this scumbag? He's just that useless son-in-law everyone's talking about from the Jones family. Before he could say another word, she slapped him in the face. "Lexi, why did you hit me?" Tucker said as he covered his face with his palm. He was confused at her reaction. "What have you done?" she asked him sharply. "I really let you get away with too much. How dare you insult Mr. Williams?" She had known Kevin for a long time, but he had never said anything like this to her. That's why she didn't even bother to ask Kevin what had happened. Lexi knew right away that it was her brother who had been causing trouble, as usual. "But sis, Kevin's just a useless freeloader," Tucker tried to explain. "Shut up right now," Lexi yelled as she slapped Tucker on the other cheek. "I want you to apologize to him immediately." Tucker hesitated. He had no idea why his sister was talking to him like this. "Right now, apologize," Lexi said as she pushed Tucker over to stand in front of Kevin. He looked down at the floor and took a deep breath before he finally mumbled, "I'm sorry, Mr. Williams, that was wrong of me. Please forgive me." Everyone started shaking their heads. What a change in Tucker's behavior from just a few minutes ago. Kevin glared at Tucker. He was really sorry to have such an unpleasant scene in front of Grandpa Steele at his birthday party. But Tucker had really asked for it. Suddenly, Kevin's phone rang. He looked at the unfamiliar caller ID and frowned as he picked up the phone. "Hello? May I ask who's calling?" "Mitchell Cook. President Wright, Emo, and Gilbert were all taken hostage by the Williams family. I was also injured," Drake said anxiously. Drake now understood how powerful Thomas Williams was. Kevin's uncle was someone that he couldn't touch, so if he wanted to save Mitchell Cook and the others, he needed Kevin's help. "What did you say? When did this happen?" Kevin asked in shock. "An hour or two ago. They're taking them to the Williams mansion in New York," Drake answered worriedly. "All right. I got it. Take care of yourself and leave the rest to me," Kevin said as he hung up the phone. "Kevin, what's wrong?" Dalton asked in confusion. He could tell that the call had upset Kevin. "Dalton, do me a favor. Call some of your men and come with me." Kevin's expression was especially grim as he tried to figure out what to do. The Williams family had actually dared to come to Chicago to abduct Kevin's friends and colleagues. If they could do that, would his parents still be safe in New York City? While Kevin was worrying about this, dozens of members of the Williams family were gathered together in the family mansion near New York City. Randall Williams, the family patriarch, was sitting in an armchair holding his hand-carved walking stick, the one that he liked to bang on the floor or a table to get everyone's attention. Cook, Adriana, Gilbert, and Emo were tied up and sitting on a bench along with Kevin's parents, Alan and Susan. Several of the younger members of the family were standing over them, ready to follow Thomas's orders as soon as he decided what punishment to inflict on them. "Alan, Susan, you haven't taught your son very well," Thomas sneered. "You've indulged Kevin, and now he's offended the family one time too many. According to our family customs, his associates will be horsewhipped 40 times each if Kevin doesn't show his face here. If he does dare to return, he will be whipped twice as many times as a warning to anyone who would dare to oppose the family in the future, and you will also be punished for helping him." "You don't know what you're talking about. My son didn't do anything wrong," Alan spat out, his eyes filled with determination. "Oh, really? Big brother, do you have any idea how arrogant your son is? Father only wanted to teach him a lesson, but he fought back, causing the family to suffer heavy losses. And he will pay for what he's done," Thomas raged. Kevin's parents were terrified. They had no idea where their son was, or if he could get there in time. Kevin rushed out of Norman Steele's birthday party as soon as he got the call from Drake telling him that Cook and his other friends had been abducted by the Williams family. He asked Dalton to get some of his bodyguards and go along with him to New York. The scene at the Williams mansion was starting to get violent. Some of the younger Williams men were threatening their captives. One of them was ordered by Thomas to punch Alan in the face to get him to betray his son. You're talking nonsense. I believe in Kevin," Alan moaned as he endured the pain. "He would never do anything to hurt the family." "Still not willing to admit it? Hit him again. Harder," Thomas shouted. After a couple of minutes of this, Alan's nose and mouth were bleeding and his eye had started to swell up. And Susan wasn't spared from this either. Thomas ordered one of his nieces to slap her on the cheek to see if that would help change Alan's mind. Even though things had gotten bloody, Grandpa Williams just sat calmly in his chair, showing no sign of stopping the beating. Susan and Alan weren't strong enough to take any more of this. On top of that, Alan was still recovering from his heart attack, so he was close to his limit. Whenever one of them passed out, someone threw a bucket of ice water on them to wake them up. Just then, the mansion's front door suddenly burst open. The solid wooden door was splintered by the powerful kick. Kevin's eyes turned blood red when he saw what they were doing to his parents and friends. He shouted fiercely, "What the hell are you doing?" "Kevin, how dare you come back here, you piece of shit!" Ethan yelled as he punched Kevin's father in the stomach. Alan was on the verge of collapse. "Stop it now!" Kevin shouted as he rushed towards his cousin. Kevin's hand was a blur as he reached out to grab Ethan by the throat. "Why don't you try hitting me instead?" Kevin said as he slapped Ethan's face viciously. When Ethan let out a muffled moan, Kevin punched him in the abdomen, doubling him over and knocking him to the ground. "Answer me! Which hand did you use to hit my father?" Kevin asked angrily. You piece of crap! How dare you hit me?" Ethan groaned in pain. Kevin ignored Ethan's complaint and grabbed his right hand. Everyone could clearly hear the crisp sound of bones breaking in Ethan's excruciating wail. "Kevin, you've broken my hand!" The intense pain made Ethan short of breath as he tried to keep himself from crying. With a ferocious look on his face, Kevin kicked Ethan in the ribs, breaking 3 of them and sending him flying 10 feet away. As Ethan landed, he took down a few of the other Williams men along the way. "Mom, Dad, are you okay?" Kevin asked as he untied their hands and hugged them tightly. Susan fainted immediately, and Alan looked at his son and whispered, "Kevin, tell me, did you do anything to hurt the family?" "No, Dad. I've never done anything to provoke the family," Whatever I did, they're the ones who forced me to do it. Kevin answered anxiously as tears fell from his eyes. Good, son. That's enough for me, Alan said faintly before he passed out. Kevin couldn't tell if his father was alive or dead. Dad! Mom! Kevin shouted loudly as he shook his parents, but neither of them woke up. What are you shouting about? Your parents failed to teach you how to show loyalty to the family, his Aunt Laura said bitterly. They deserve to be punished for that, even if it means their death. Laura gave him a cruel glare. After handing Ethan over to one of her other relatives, she slowly walked up to Kevin and looked him straight in the eye. What did you just say? Kevin snarled back. I said your parents deserve to die. And as for you, you bastard, how dare you show such disrespect to your grandfather? Do you really think you can get away with this without being punished? Laura chided him. Kevin gently lowered his parents to the floor. After wiping the tears off his face, he stood up and walked towards Laura. What do you want? Laura snarled at him. Let me tell you something. This is the Williams family. If you aren't with us, you're against us. And you're nothing to us. Nothing, huh? Kevin suddenly moved toward her and took her by the arm. He dragged her over to his uncle and growled, I'm sure the Williams family would be a lot better off without you. Laura was so upset and frightened that she fainted. Thomas caught his wife and sat her down in a chair. Kevin, how dare you hurt my wife? Thomas shrieked savagely as he rushed towards Kevin. Shut up, Kevin shouted as he slapped his uncle right in the face. It was more of a punch than a slap, and it spun Thomas around as he fell to the ground. His head was buzzing. Then Kevin grabbed his uncle by the throat and said coldly, Today, right in front of Grandpa and all these witnesses, let me ask you something. 3 years ago when I bought the shares of Orion Group, all the money I spent was earned through my own hard work. Did I take even a penny from the family? Then you took Laura's advice and kicked me and my parents out of the family without any investigation at all. Did you tell Grandpa about any of that? Kevin continued. Under Ethan and Laura's crappy management, Williams Media was left an empty shell. If you hadn't given it to me in exchange for my financial help, I'm sure it would have gone bankrupt. Then you took the Williams family's money and joined forces with outside families to attack Williams Media and drive down its stock so that I wouldn't be able to recover from the losses. Everyone remained silent as Kevin continued to lay out the facts in front of Randall Williams and the rest of the family. Did you notice that, even though I said I was going to take back the $3 billion that I lent the family, did I actually come back and demand it? No, Kevin asked coldly. But what about you guys? What did you do to me every time that you saw me? Other than insulting me, what else have you done? Kevin slapped Thomas hard in the face and added, I'm so much stronger than your worthless son. And another thing, my father, your actual brother, how could you have him beaten to death? Kevin threw Thomas into the crowd as soon as he was finished speaking. How dare you? Grandpa Williams snapped as he banged his walking stick on the floor. He was furious. How dare I? Grandpa, let me ask you a question. You said that I offended the family, but when did I do anything like that on purpose? Kevin replied without the slightest bit of fear. When he heard this, Grandpa Williams got choked up and couldn't say anything in response. With the help of two of his family members, Thomas stood up shakily and said, Kevin, no matter what you say, you won't be able to walk out of here on your own. Listen up, everyone. Take this son of a bitch and punish him the way we always deal with traitors to the family. A group of men started walking towards Kevin with hideous expressions on their faces. What now? Do you need help to bully me because you can't do it yourself? Kevin roared before he shouted to the men who were waiting for him outside. Dalton, what are you waiting for? Do you want to let me have all the fun? As soon as he said this, Dalton rushed headlong through the demolished front door. He was leading more than a dozen imposing-looking men. "Who the hell are you? How dare you enter our home?" Thomas shouted at the top of his lungs. "So you're the Williams family?" Dalton shouted mockingly. "Kevin is like a brother to me. I can't let you treat him like this. And to answer your question, my name is Dalton Steele." "You're from the Steele family?" Thomas asked in shock. "Dalton, let's not waste any more time," Kevin said to his friend. "Get my parents and the others to the hospital." They were all in bad shape, and Kevin was anxious to get them medical help. Grandpa Williams stepped out in front of everyone holding his walking stick. He looked very strong for his advanced age as he warned them. "First, you need to go through me." Dalton Steele's expression instantly became serious when he saw this. Looking very confident, Grandpa Williams said, "Young man, out of respect for your grandfather, Norman Steele, I'll forgive your youthful exuberance. Just go back to Chicago while you still can. Remember, we aren't afraid of your family, and we won't allow you to come in here making demands." Dalton recovered from his initial surprise and repeated, "Sir, I'll say it again. Kevin is my brother." Then he turned his head and said to the men who were standing next to him, "Quick, go and help the others." "Have it your way, you arrogant fool," Grandpa Williams said as he raised his walking stick and swung it at Dalton's head. But it was caught before it reached its target. "Grandpa, I hate to contradict you, but I can't let you make a mistake like this," Kevin said very confidently. He remembered fondly how much love his grandfather had shown him when he was a child, so Kevin didn't want to fight with him unless it was absolutely necessary. But it was starting to look like he might have to do battle with Grandpa Williams anyway. Kevin asked Dalton to help his parents get medical help while he faced his grandfather in front of the whole family. He didn't want to fight him, but it looked like he had to. So he warned Grandpa Williams not to start a battle with his friend Dalton Steele. Hearing Kevin talk to him like this, Grandpa Williams was stunned for a moment, but he quickly recovered. Then he swung his walking stick around in a big circle, forcing Kevin, Dalton, and the others to take 4 or 5 steps back. "As long as I have anything to do with it, you won't be able to leave today," Grandpa Williams said as he held his lion-headed walking stick and banged it on the ground forcefully. Several of the floor tiles cracked from the violent blows. "Grandpa, remember you're starting this, not me," Kevin said confidently. "You really don't know what's good for you, do you?" Grandpa Williams shouted. Then he turned around and yelled, "Everyone retreat!" Hearing this, the group of attackers from the Williams family all took 5 or 6 steps back. Kevin could tell that his grandfather still had a lot of skills. After all, he had spent his entire youth training in the martial arts. Kevin wasn't looking forward to this match. However, for the sake of his parents and friends, he had no choice but to fight. "Grandpa, I'm sorry I have to do this," Kevin said very sincerely. Grandpa Williams waved his walking stick around threateningly and replied, "We haven't seen each other in a few years. I want to see if you can back up your arrogant attitude." "Dalton, get my parents out of here," Kevin shouted at his friend. Then he took a deep breath and rushed at his grandfather. The moment Kevin moved, there was a loud shout that shook the entire mansion. "Come on, focus," Kevin muttered to himself. It was astounding how much he had recovered from the injuries he'd received in the past couple of days. "Well done," Grandpa Williams said as he moved forward to meet Kevin's attack. The two of them collided explosively. "Everyone, follow me," Dalton shouted as the fight moved into the mansion's courtyard. "If anyone attacks us, fight back with all that you have." "Chase them all out," Thomas roared as they got closer. Soon, the Williams family and Steele's people started fighting with each other. At the same time, Grandpa Williams lifted his walking stick and brought it down in a powerful overhead strike. It just missed Kevin's body and smashed into the ground, breaking several marble paving stones. "Grandfather, please don't make me hurt you," Kevin said as he gritted his teeth and took 2 steps back. Then he threw himself at Grandpa Williams again.
"Kevin's very good, but he doesn't know his own limitations yet,"
Grandpa Williams said to himself. Then he swung his stick around and around in circles, trying to strike his grandson. Kevin caught the lion's head carving on the end of the walking stick, but not before Grandpa Williams had struck several of his own family members, knocking them to the ground one after another. Kevin took a couple of steps back. After he had regained his balance, he spat out a mouthful of blood. Grandpa Williams also took a few steps back, and his face turned pale.
"Kevin, are you all right?"
Dalton asked with concern as he cradled Kevin's father in his arms. "Don't worry about me. Just get my father and the others to the hospital," Kevin said right away.
"Kevin, I really underestimated you,"
Grandpa Williams commented as he looked around the courtyard. The Williams family's best fighters had been beaten up badly by Dalton and his bodyguards. Some of them were lying on the ground, screaming in agony from various painful injuries. "I never thought that my grandfather could still fight so well," Kevin said with a solemn expression on his face.
"You shouldn't be so brash. The family is doing this for your own good,"
Grandpa Williams said bluntly. "The family? Ha!" Kevin sneered as he looked at everyone. "I swear to you, if my father doesn't survive, if anything happens to him, I will bury the entire Williams family with him." Grandpa Williams became livid when he heard this.
"Ridiculous! Just because I can't defeat you?"
"I admit that I'm not a match for you, grandfather, but can you guarantee that you'll be able to protect the Williams family forever? Will these people ever be able to step outside of their homes?" Kevin said threateningly.
How dare you talk to me like this?"
Grandpa Williams snarled as he held his walking stick tightly. He was so furious that his chest was heaving. "That's all I've got to say. Whether you will be able to protect them or not, only time will tell." After saying this, Kevin turned around and left. Grandpa Williams stared at the mansion's smashed front door. It suddenly occurred to him that there was something suspicious about all of this.
"Father, are you all right?"
Thomas asked as his cousins helped him walk over to Grandpa Williams. "Kevin has committed a heinous crime. How dare he attack you, Father?" Laura, who had just woken up, said with hatred in her eyes. "And that Dalton Steele, he came here to interfere in our family's business because he thinks the Steeles can protect him. He's even injured some of us. We can't let him get away with this."
"Grandfather, 15 of us need to go to the hospital immediately. There are also a dozen or so who are seriously injured,"
Ethan said angrily.
"This Kevin is really detestable. He actually joined forces with outsiders and came to cause trouble here in our family." "Then get them to the hospital,"
Grandpa Williams said calmly. Then he turned to Thomas and said,
"Come with me."
While this was going on, Kevin had already arrived at Philip Quinn's private hospital. Under Dr. Willow's skilled care, Alan and the others quickly received the medical attention they needed. After everything that had just happened, Kevin didn't want to leave his parents in New York, so he arranged for them to be transferred to a hospital in Chicago once their injuries had been treated. Then he made plans to head back to Chicago himself, accompanied by Dalton and his bodyguards. What Kevin didn't expect was that Dr. Willow would actually follow them back to Chicago and even use her connections to take charge of Alan and Susan's treatment. After making all the arrangements, Kevin called Lily to let her know what had been going on and that he was heading home. A few hours later, Lily and her mother walked into the hospital where Kevin's parents had been transferred, downtown General. Dorothy said unhappily, "Lily, if you wanted to see Kevin's parents, why did you have to drag me along? I already told my friends that I'd play cards with them later." "Mom, some things are more important than playing cards," Lily said helplessly. "After all, they aren't dying. How are we going to help?" Dorothy complained. "Mom, what are you saying? Kevin and I have been married for almost 3 years, but we've never met his parents. Now that the two of them are in the hospital, we really should visit them. It's the humane thing to do," Lily said assertively. "I really don't know what you see in that good-for-nothing. Dorothy whined as she reluctantly entered the elevator. "Mom, I wish you'd give Kevin a chance. He's doing really well now, and I'm sure he'll be making a good salary soon," Lily pleaded with her mother. The way Lily saw it, now that she had accepted Kevin, she should do something to help his parents. Okay, I'll try. But let me set some ground rules. I'm only staying for a few minutes, Dorothy said obstinately. Then she warned Lily, "You'd better not stay too long. If you spend too much time with people like them, you may pick up some bad habits." Just as she was saying this, the two of them arrived in Alan and Susan's wing of the hospital. But they were stopped by two men. "I'm sorry, but no one is allowed to enter this area," one of the men told them. Dorothy was stunned when she heard this and thought that maybe she and Lily had taken a wrong turn. Based on the looks of the two bodyguards, she figured that they were protecting someone very important. Just then, Dr. Willow walked over wearing her white lab coat, her stethoscope dangling casually around her neck. "What's going on?" Dr. Willow asked the guards as she looked at Lily and Dorothy. "Dr. Willow, these two people want to enter the room," one of them answered very respectfully. "Oh, are you Kevin's friends?" Dr. Willow asked curiously. "He's my husband," Lily answered awkwardly. "Is that so? Then please come in." Dr. Willow smiled and invited the two of them into the room. When they walked in, Alan was lying on the hospital bed wrapped in bandages. His wife, Susan, was in the other hospital bed. "Alan, Susan, you have some visitors," Dr. Willow said very gently. Lily and Dorothy looked around the room, unsure of what to say next. Now that Kevin's parents had been transferred to Downtown General in Chicago, Lily went to visit them with her mother, Dorothy. She was a little nervous because in the 3 years that Lily had been married to Kevin, she had never met his parents. Dr. Willow led them into the room and told Alan and Susan that they had visitors. When he heard Dr. Willow, Kevin slowly opened his eyes and got up from the couch where he'd been resting. "Lily, what are you doing here?" Kevin asked happily. "Can't I come visit your parents?" Lily replied as she gave Dr. Willow a suspicious glance. "Let me introduce you to everyone," Kevin said with a smile. "This is my father, Alan, and this is my mother, Susan, and this is Dr. Willow, the director of the hospital in New York that first treated them. Thanks to her, my parents are doing fine now." Lily didn't seem very excited. She greeted Kevin's parents and then turned around and asked Kevin jealously, "Hospital director? From New York? What's she doing here?" "It's like this. Dr. Willow, Kevin tried to explain. "Really, Kevin? This is unbelievable. You were gone for just a couple of days and brought back some other woman?" Dorothy interrupted Kevin rudely. "You haven't changed at all. Still trash." "That's not what's going on at all. You've misunderstood," Dr. Willow quickly tried to explain. "Please don't try to explain," Dorothy said bluntly. "You've been caught red-handed. There's nothing more to say." Then she continued in a nasty tone of voice. "Who would believe that the director of a hospital in New York would come all the way to Chicago just for a scumbag like you? If you're going to lie, at least come up with something believable." Dr. Willow tried to reply, but she was caught off guard by Dorothy's harsh accusations. She stood there blushing, trying to find a way to set things straight. Susan sat up in her hospital bed and tried to explain. "You've really misunderstood. We just got here from New York after a horrible experience that almost killed my husband. Kevin and Fifi are just very good friends. She's really helped us a lot." "Fifi? I'm ashamed of you, Kevin," Dorothy scoffed. "Lily, this is all a huge misunderstanding," Kevin said helplessly. But Dorothy spoke first. "I'm not surprised that things have come to this, and it's not a misunderstanding. Kevin, you've been freeloading in our house for 3 years. At first I thought that no matter how useless you are, at least you were honest. As long as you treated Lily well, I was willing to look the other way. But I really didn't expect you to cheat on my daughter with some little tramp that you picked up in New York." Dorothy continued very harshly. "Well, that's fine with me. Anyway, it looks like your parents are like this tramp. So now you can go ahead and finally divorce Lily.
I'm sure I can find a good husband for her." This made Alan so angry that his heart monitor started beeping wildly. "Dad, are you all right?" Kevin asked nervously as he walked over to his father. "What are you shouting for? He's still alive. Don't try to change the topic," Dorothy said callously. Kevin suddenly snapped his head around and glared at Dorothy fiercely. He shouted loudly, "What the hell is wrong with you? Don't you ever think before you speak?" "How dare you talk to me like that, you piece of trash?" Dorothy retorted angrily. "You go out and cheat on your wife and then you don't have the guts to admit it? What kind of man are you?" Kevin opened his mouth to try to respond to Dorothy's accusations, but she just interrupted him and kept on yelling. Then she spoke to Alan and Susan as she pointed accusingly at Kevin. "This son of yours isn't only incompetent, but he also loves to embarrass my family and draw attention to himself wherever he goes. I really don't know what kind of hussy would fall for him. If I had a son like him, I'd die of embarrassment." She was furious and didn't care how much she was upsetting the two hospital patients. Kevin finally couldn't hold it in anymore, and he sharply told her to shut up. He was afraid that Dorothy's tirade would make his parents angry, and that wouldn't be good for them in their condition. "Why should I shut up? Did I say something wrong?" Dorothy snapped back as she put her hands on her hips. "Please don't upset Mr. and Mrs. Williams anymore. They need to rest now," Dr. Willow said calmly. Because of her training, she managed to keep a cool head even though Dorothy was making her quite angry. "Since when did a tramp like you earn the right to speak here?" Dorothy said as she walked up to Dr. Willow and raised her hand like she was going to slap her. But Kevin grabbed her wrist to stop her. Seeing all of this made Lily feel very downhearted. "If you continue to behave like this, don't blame me for being rude to you," Kevin said harshly. The entire room suddenly became quiet and Dorothy looked at Kevin in shock. She never thought he would be so assertive with her. Lily took a deep breath and asked hesitantly, "Kevin, what do you want to do? Are you going to hit my mother?" "You don't believe me either?" Kevin asked Lily sorrowfully. "I can only believe what I see," Lily said without changing her expression. Kevin slowly let go of Dorothy's wrist and stepped back. Then he let out a long sigh and looked Dorothy in the eyes. "Please leave. Don't come back and disturb my parents like this again." "Do you really think I want to stay here? I don't want to spend another minute with scum like you," Dorothy muttered. "Your parents should be ashamed of you." "Get lost," Kevin roared as he bumped into a shelf and knocked a fruit basket onto the floor. The two guards at the door immediately rushed in and looked at Lily and Dorothy suspiciously. "Come on, Lily, let's go." Dorothy scowled as she pulled her daughter by the arm and quickly left the room. After a long pause, Kevin gestured to the two guards that it was okay for them to leave. "Mr. Williams, are you all right?" Dr. Willow asked guiltily. "I'm sorry about this. If it wasn't for me, this wouldn't have happened." Dr. Willow was grateful to Kevin for all the help he'd given her. If it wasn't for him, she was afraid that she would have spent the rest of her life as an ordinary doctor and not a hospital director. But if Kevin ended up getting a divorce because of her, Dr. Willow could never forgive herself. "It's not your fault. Go ahead and check on my parents. After you're done, we can go out to eat," Kevin offered as he forced a smile. Since Lily already didn't believe him, Kevin figured it couldn't make things any worse to go out to dinner with Dr. Willow. "I'll take good care of your parents, but I'm not that hungry right now," Dr. Willow said shyly. "That's okay, but I really would like to thank you," Kevin said calmly. Then he turned serious and told her, "It might be hard on you over the next few days. Please take care of them." Then he remembered how his parents had ended up in the hospital in the first place, and he felt very disappointed to be a member of the Williams family. As Lily and Dorothy were walking out of the hospital, they received a call from Grandma Jones, saying that there was an urgent matter that she wanted to discuss. The two of them called for a ride and quickly headed to the Jones family mansion. When Grandma Jones saw Lily walking in the room, she stood up from her chair. "Grandma, what happened?" Lily asked in puzzlement. Actually, there's nothing urgent, her grandmother replied.
Grandma, why are you still talking to her? Jason suddenly interrupted. Then Jason turned to Lily and said to her, Let me tell you what happened. Last month, the Jones family's financial record showed that, and then he paused for a moment, the family's total income has decreased by almost 30%. What's the use of having so many shares?
Has it gone down that much? How is that possible? Lily asked in shock.
What are you pretending for? The accounting department also said that the money we lost was transferred to the import-export company that Tyler Dawn gave you.
Jason sneered, and then he said,
Lily, how could you do such a thing? Are you trying to pocket all of our family's money?
That's impossible, Lily stammered. I've never let the people from the import-export company interact with anyone from our family. Then Lily realized that although she had control of the company Tyler had given her, she didn't know everyone the Jones family had running their businesses. Something didn't add up.
Just look for yourself,
Jason said as he threw a stack of financial statements onto the floor. Suddenly, Grandma Jones let out a long sigh. Lily, it looks like you're still too young to be in such an important position. You don't have enough experience yet. Although you didn't let the companies interact with each other, can you guarantee that they didn't do it privately? Lily didn't know what to say. Lily, take my advice. Return your shares to the family, and then go back to your old position with us and get more experience, Grandma Jones said as she deliberately looked over at Jason. The corners of her mouth turned up into a villainous smile. It looked like she'd be able to get her company shares back after all. After Lily and Dorothy left Kevin and his parents at the hospital, they got a call telling them that they needed to go see Grandma Jones. When Lily got to the family mansion, Jason informed her that the family's money had been funneled into the import-export company that Tyler Dawn had given her. Now, Grandma wanted her to give up her shares in the family business. Grandma, do you really want me to hand over my shares that badly? Lily asked hesitantly. This news had really upset her. Lily, I don't want your shares for myself. I only want you to return them for the sake of the entire family. But I guess you don't want to see the Jones family succeed, do you? Her grandmother gently advised her. Face it, you aren't the best of our family's younger generation. Don't let your thirst for power bury the rest of the family, Grandma Jones said sternly. Why don't you just transfer some of the shares and then set up a board of directors for the family? This might seem like a step down, but you would still control the board's leadership. At the same time, you could also get more experience. What do you think? This plan got Jason very excited. He knew that Lily would no longer control the Jones family's affairs as soon as she handed over her shares. Lily was silent for a long moment as she considered her options. Finally, she let out a long sigh and nodded gently. She knew very well that it was only because of Tyler Dawn's help that she had found herself in the top position in the Jones family. But this wasn't enough to get her relatives to listen to her. Do you agree? Grandma Jones asked happily. I'll do as you say, Grandma. In any case, I don't seem to have any choice, Lily said in a low voice. Okay, Lily, I'm glad I haven't misjudged you, Grandma Jones said cheerfully. We've already drawn up the necessary documents. You can look them over before you sign. As soon as she said that, the Jones family's accountants and attorneys immediately took out several documents for Lily to sign. The next 5 days passed by very quickly. After his parents had recovered from their injuries, Kevin decided to return to Williams Media to see how things were going. Kevin, I'm really sorry about this. If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't be riding a scooter right now, Dr. Willow said apologetically. At the moment, she had her arms wrapped around Kevin's waist as she sat on the rear seat of the little moped. That's okay. Anyway, I'm used to getting around on a scooter, Kevin said casually as he weaved through traffic on the way to his office building. The two of them seemed to be drawing a bit of attention from passerbys.
They looked a little too old to be riding around the city on a little scooter, and Kevin felt slightly self-conscious about it. It all had started 2 days ago when Kevin headed out with Dr. Willow to buy some clothes for his parents. Dr. Willow mentioned that she was planning to buy a car, but since she got her driver's license, she hadn't practiced much, which made her a little anxious. So Kevin decided to help her out by finding an empty parking lot so she could practice driving without any traffic. Then he gave her the key to his Pagani Roadster and let her get behind the wheel. Unfortunately, she drove the car right into a light pole and then another one. The car was still at the body shop and Kevin had no idea when he'd get it back. So he decided to ride his scooter for a while just for fun instead of taking one of his other cars. They soon arrived in the Williams Media parking garage. Wow, Kevin, is that person over there Brittany Davis? I really like to listen to her music. I sure didn't expect to see her here in person today, Dr. Willow said excitedly. Do you really like her? Would you like her autograph? Kevin asked her. There had been a lot of changes at Williams Media lately. For some unknown reason, a few of their clients had suddenly canceled their contracts and the company had suffered huge losses from it. That was why Kevin had decided to stop by and find out exactly what had happened. But right after Kevin parked his scooter and he and Dr. Willow got off, a black car suddenly crashed into it, almost demolishing the little bike. Why do so many people crash into scooters in this garage? Kevin thought to himself. Soon, a young man in a business suit and shiny leather shoes quickly jumped out of the car. He looked at the big dent in his fender and got very upset. What's wrong with you? Why did you park a scooter in this garage? Do you realize how much this car cost me? Now this is going to cost you, the man shouted at Kevin. Are you kidding? You're the one who hit us. Don't turn this around and make it look like it's our fault, Dr. Willow told him. She didn't show any fear as she stood up for Kevin. When the man saw Dr. Willow, he was speechless. She was very beautiful in the way she was dressed. She could have been one of the celebrity clients at Williams Media. Hi there, the man said as he tried to charm her. Were you riding on this little scooter? Just then, a young woman in her mid-30s stepped out of the car. Logan, how is the car? Is everything all right? Kevin was stunned when he saw the woman. It was actually his college advisor, Professor Charity Boyer. Kevin, what are you doing here? Charity asked with a surprised look on her face. Do you work for Williams Media? I'm just hanging around, Kevin replied. The driver, whose name was Logan Morgan, said with a sneer, You must be mistaken, Miss Boyer. The way this guy is dressed, do you really think he works here? Charity suddenly sighed when she heard that. Tucker had mentioned to her that after Kevin graduated, he ended up drifting around. He even went to freeload off his in-laws and he had turned into a real loser. Kevin, I told you when you were in school, you have to take responsibility for yourself. Don't expect everything to just fall into your lap. But it sounds like you didn't take my words to heart, Charity said very seriously. Take a look at what Brittany is doing. She was also one of my students and now her career is taking off. And Tucker is currently the manager of a large company. How did you end up like this? She kept scolding him. So you were one of Miss Boyer's students? Morgan asked Kevin. Then he thought for a moment and said, For her sake, I won't argue with you about this. Just pay me $10,000 and we'll call it good. You're being very unreasonable, Dr. Willow replied, sounding very unconvinced. Not to mention that you're the one who hit us. And let's talk about your car. It can't be worth more than $40,000. Do you really think this little dent will cost $10,000 to fix? You're just being greedy. Kevin, is this young woman your wife? Charity asked curiously as she looked at Dr. Willow. The question made Dr. Willow suddenly feel very self-conscious. No, please, don't misunderstand. Mr. Williams and I are only friends. Wow, Kevin, things must be pretty miserable for you. Even your own wife isn't willing to admit that she knows you, Charity said regretfully. I also told you that a person needs to have some ambition. But did you listen to me? Just look at you now. This is the result of your lack of motivation. Charity's face showed her disappointment as she said this. Professor Boyer, we aren't in school right now. Why do you feel like you need to teach me a lesson? Kevin asked with a faint smile. Stop slacking off. Once a teacher, always a teacher. Even when one of my students graduates, I still feel responsible for them. Seeing how you are now, I feel ashamed for you, Charity said coldly. She continued to scold him relentlessly. When you see how well your classmates are doing, doesn't that have any effect on you? Are you really happy to be mooching off your in-laws? When Kevin heard this, all he could do was shake his head. He still hadn't gotten over the big scene that Dorothy made in his parents' hospital room, nor the fact that Lily still didn't trust him. Kevin had completely given up on the Jones family and was determined to never go back to them. All right, if you don't want to listen to me, then I have nothing more to say to you. You have to live your own life, Charity Boyer sighed in disappointment. If you damaged Morgan's car, then you need to find a way to fix it for him. What Miss Boyer said just makes a lot of sense. Listen, even though my car isn't expensive, it's brand new, Morgan sneered. Then he added, and don't you know you can't park scooters in a parking space that's reserved for cars? Did you just make up this rule? Kevin almost laughed out loud when he heard him say that. I'm sure you're jealous of people who can own real cars, but that's just the way things are, Morgan said mockingly. What more could Kevin say to someone like this?